I hit the floor before I even understood what had happened. 1 second I was standing at the top of the staircase, and the next I was at the bottom, my shoulder pressed against the cold hardwood, a sharp ringing spreading from the back of my skull outward. I lay there for what felt like a full minute. I could hear voices above me, laughter, the clink of wine glasses, and then my son's voice, clear and easy, saying, "He's always been clumsy. Don't worry about him." Nobody came down. I want to tell you this story from the beginning, because the ending only makes sense if you understand everything that came before it. And the beginning, like most painful things in life, started with love. My wife passed away 11 years ago, breast cancer. She was 54 years old, and she was the most quietly fierce person I have ever known. We built everything together, the company, the house in Oakville, the life we always said we'd get around to enjoying once things slowed down. Things never slow down. You learn that too late. After she was gone, my son became my world. He was 28 when we lost her, already working in finance downtown, already wearing suits that cost more than my first car. I was proud of him. I want to be honest about that. I was genuinely, deeply proud. He had her sharpness and my stubbornness, and I thought that combination would carry him far. What I didn't understand then, what I only started to understand much later, was that he had also inherited something from neither of us. A need to be seen. A hunger for rooms where the ceiling was high, and the wine list was thick, and everyone was performing a version of themselves that had nothing to do with who they actually were. I am a simple man in the way that word used to mean something good. I grew up in a small town 2 hours north of Toronto, the son of a man who repaired farm equipment and a woman who ran the local post office. We were not wealthy. We were not comfortable, even. There were winters where comfort meant the wood stove was burning and there was enough food that nobody went to bed angry. That is what I grew up knowing. When I started my logistics company in my early 30s, I worked 16-hour days for 7 years before I paid myself a real salary. My wife kept the books at our kitchen table after our son went to sleep. We did not take vacations until the business could afford to run without us for 2 weeks. We did not buy new cars until the old ones stopped running. We did not perform wealth. We just quietly built it, the way you build anything that lasts slowly, without fanfare, and with your hands. By the time my son was old enough to notice money, we had it, but I did not raise him around it. The house we lived in when he was growing up was the same modest semi-detached in Mississauga, where we'd started. I drove a 12-year-old pickup truck. His mother packed his lunches. When he wanted expensive things, we talked about value. When he wanted name brands, we talked about craftsmanship. I thought I was teaching him something. I thought it was landing. He moved to Toronto after university. He did well at his firm. He bought a condo in the Distillery District. I helped with the down payment, but I never told him how much I could have helped. I gave him what I thought was reasonable, what felt honest, what would make him work for the rest rather than expect it. He worked for it. I respected that. Then he met her family. His girlfriend's parents, her father in particular, were the kind of wealthy that announces itself before you walk through the door. Old money from somewhere in Westmount, a family name that showed up on buildings, on hospital wings, on charity galas that cost $400 a plate. Her father had the particular confidence of a man who has never had to explain himself to anyone. Her mother had the particular exhaustion of a woman who has spent 40 years making sure everyone in the room felt slightly inferior. I understood these people within the first 10 minutes of meeting them. I had met versions of them before, in boardrooms and at industry events, and I had always navigated them fine because I never needed anything from them. My son needed something from them. He needed them to approve. I watched it happen over the course of about a year. The way he started talking differently around them. The restaurants he started suggesting when we had dinner places where the portions were small and the attitude was large. The way he began to soften certain facts about me. My profession became logistics, said quickly, and moved past. My home I had long since moved to a nicer place in Oakville, on the lake, though I still kept it understated, became a place outside the city. My truck became something he apologized for in advance. I did not say anything for a long time because I thought it was a phase. I thought he was nervous about impressing them, and that once he felt secure, he would relax. I had done embarrassing things in my 30s for approval I didn't need. I gave him room. The room was a mistake. The dinner was supposed to be a celebration. Her father's 68th birthday, held at their home in Rosedale, a house I can only describe as a statement. Stone exterior, a long curved driveway, a foyer with a chandelier that probably cost more than most people's cars. There were about 20 guests, old family, friends, a few colleagues of her father's, a couple of her parents' neighbors, who had the easy, unhurried manner of people for whom nothing has ever been urgently wrong. I drove myself there. My son had suggested I take a car service, but I'd taken my truck. Not to make a point, I just didn't think about it. I parked at the end of the driveway and walked up to the door in my best jacket, the dark navy wool one my wife had picked out for me years ago. I was a little early. My son met me at the door. I could see it in his face immediately, that flash of something uncomfortable, quickly suppressed. He introduced me to her parents, standing in the foyer, and I watched the calculation happen in her father's, the handshake, the assessment, the polite repositioning of expectations. Her mother smiled the way you smile at something mildly inconvenient. I did not know anyone there. I sat at the end of the long dining table, next to a retired judge and across from one of her father's colleagues, a man who sold commercial real estate and had opinions about the Leafs that he shared with the confidence of someone who had never been wrong about anything. I ate well. I listened more than I talked. I had a glass of wine and then switched to water because I was driving. At some point in the evening, after the main course, after the toasts, her father asked me what I did. I told him I ran a logistics company. He nodded the way you nod at something small. My son, sitting 3 seats away, jumped in before I could continue. He's basically semi-retired, he said. He does a bit of consulting. Small-scale stuff. I looked at him. He did not look at me. I let it go. I thought, it is his girlfriend's father's birthday. I thought, this is not the moment. I thought, I will talk to him later and explain that I don't need to be minimized for his comfort, that I am not something to be managed. Later never came the way I expected it to. After dinner, her mother suggested we move to the sitting room for dessert. The house had one of those grand staircases, curved, carpeted, with a dark wood railing. I was climbing it beside an older woman, one of the family friends, and she was telling me about her garden in Muskoka, and I was listening, and I missed the next step. I don't know exactly how it happened. My foot caught the edge of the carpet, or I misjudged the height, or I simply wasn't paying close enough attention. What I know is that I went forward and then down, and I caught the railing with my right hand, but my left shoulder hit the edge of a step hard, and then I was at the bottom, sitting on the floor of the foyer with my hand pressed to the back of my head where it had clipped the wall. There was a moment of silence. And then, from the sitting room at the top of the stairs, I heard laughter. Not cruel, calculated laughter. More the kind that escapes before the brain can stop it. The kind that happens when something unexpected and slightly absurd occurs. But laughter. And then my son's voice. Oh, that's Dad. He's always been like that. A bit of a bull in a china shop. More laughter. Relaxed. As though the situation had been handled. Nobody came down for almost 3 minutes. The older woman who had been walking with me crouched down and asked if I was all right. The retired judge, who had been in the foyer getting his coat, helped me to my feet. By the time my son appeared at the top of the stairs, I was already standing, my jacket straightened, my hand still at the back of my head. You okay? He called down. Fine, I said. You sure? Do you need some water or something? I'm fine, I said again. I think I'll head home. Already? Dessert's just early start tomorrow, I said. Thank you for having me. I said this last part loudly enough for the room above to hear. Then I got my coat from the closet by the door, let myself out, walked to my truck, and sat in it for about 5 minutes before I started the engine. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that, not because there would have been anything wrong with it, but because what I felt wasn't grief. It was something colder. It was the feeling of a door closing very quietly, a lock turning, the particular silence that follows a decision that has been made without words. I drove home to Oakville. I made tea. I sat in the kitchen, where I could see the lake, where the November ice was just beginning to form at the edges. And I thought about my wife. I thought about what she would have said. She would not have been dramatic about it. She would have said, "Well, now you know." And she would have been right. I did not sleep well, but I was up early, the way I have been my whole life, the way my father was. I called my lawyer at 7 in the morning. He is a patient man who has worked with me for 22 years and who, I suspect, anticipated something like this call eventually. I told him what I needed. He did not ask many questions. We had a meeting scheduled for that afternoon. I also called my accountant, and then the woman who runs the trust management for my estate, a sharp, thorough woman named Margaret, who I have trusted with my financial affairs for nearly 15 years. I told them both the same thing. I wanted to review everything: beneficiaries, structures, access, all of it. That afternoon, let me tell you something about my finances, because my son did not know the full picture, and I think that matters to understanding what happened next. The logistics company I built was not small scale. By the time I sold the majority stake to a private equity group 8 years ago, we had operations in 6 provinces, contracts with 3 national grocery chains, and a fleet of over 200 vehicles. The sale was not in the newspapers. I did not want it to be. I have never wanted that kind of visibility, but it was significant. I retained a minority interest and a consulting role for 5 years after. I have also been investing quietly for 30 years, in real estate, in private equity, in a few early-stage companies that did well. I am not a billionaire. I am not the kind of person who shows up on lists. But I am also not semi-retired doing small-scale consulting work. My son knew I was comfortable. He did not know the actual numbers. I had never told him because I had never seen a reason to, and because I had always believed that knowing you will inherit money is one of the most reliable ways to stop becoming the person you could be. That afternoon, I made changes. The trust structure I had in place, the one that would, upon my death, transfer the majority of my estate to my son, was revised. I did not disinherit him entirely. I am not a vindictive man, and I do not believe in using money as punishment any more than I believe in using it as reward. But the structure changed substantially. A significant portion was redirected to a charitable foundation, something my wife had always wanted administered by Margaret, and a board that did not include my son. A portion went into trust for causes I care about: vocational training programs, rural infrastructure, a few hospitals that had helped us when my wife was sick. What remained for my son was conditional and modest by the standards of what had been there before. I also called the bank and removed his name from the secondary account I had set up for him years ago, the one I quietly used to top up when I could see he was stretched. He did not know about this either. He had assumed the account came from somewhere vague, a small inheritance from his mother, perhaps, or interest from some investment I had mentioned in passing. He had never asked directly, and I had never explained. I did not call him that day. I did not text. I went to bed at my usual time, read for an hour, and slept better than I had in months. My phone had 43 missed calls by the time I woke up the next morning. 11 were from him. The rest were from her mother, which surprised me, and from a number I didn't recognize that turned out, when I looked it up, to be her father's personal line. I made coffee. I stood at the window and watched a pair of geese on the frozen edge of the lake, and I thought about all the different versions of this phone call I could have. I thought about what I wanted to say and what I wanted to hear. I thought about whether any answer he could give me would change anything. Then I called him back. He answered on the first ring. He was at work. I could hear the background sound of the office, subdued and echoey. His voice was careful. He said, "Dad, I've been trying to reach you." I said, "I know. Are you okay?" After last night, I should have come down sooner. I know that. "You should have," I said. "It was just you said you were fine." And I thought, "I was fine," I said. "That's not why I'm calling." A pause. "Okay. I want to ask you something, and I want you to think before you answer. Not about what I want to hear, just honestly. Dad, when your girlfriend's father asked what I did, and you said I was semi-retired, doing small-scale consulting, did you know that was false when you said it?" The silence lasted long enough that I had my answer. It wasn't like that, he said finally. I didn't want to make it into a whole thing. Her family is her family, I said. They're not your family. Your family is me. And I was sitting 3 feet away while you made me smaller than I am, so that you could feel bigger in a room you don't belong in any more than I do. His voice got defensive then, a little tight, the way it always did when he was ashamed of something and didn't want to admit it. You're making this into something it wasn't. I'm telling you what it was, I said. I'm not angry. I want you to understand that. I'm not calling you to yell. I'm calling because something happened last night that I think was a long time coming, and I think we both need to understand it clearly. What do you mean something happened? I told him. I told him about the lawyer. I told him about Margaret. I told him about the account. I did not tell him the specific numbers, because the specific numbers were not the point. The point was that there was a version of his future that had been quietly existing on my behalf, and that version had changed. The silence on the other end of the line was different from the earlier one. It had a different weight. You can't be serious, he said. I've never been more serious about anything. Dad, over a dinner? This is because I didn't come downstairs fast enough when you fell? No, I said. This is because of the man you've been becoming for the past 3 years, and the dinner was the moment I understood it clearly enough to act. You can call it whatever you want. Call it a dinner. Call it a staircase. But it isn't just that. I could hear him breathing. I could hear, somewhere behind the breathing, the beginning of a recalibration, that particular sound of someone realizing that a thing they assumed was permanent has turned out not to be. What do I do? He said finally. I don't know, I said. That's something you'll have to figure out. Can we talk about this? In person? I can come to Oakville this weekend. We can. You can come whenever you want, I said. My door isn't closed, but I'm not going to undo what I've done because you're worried. I did it because it was right, not because I was upset. I want to tell you about the weeks that followed, because they were not simple. He did come to Oakville. He sat at my kitchen table with the same look he'd had at 12 years old when he'd broken a neighbor's window with a baseball and didn't know how to fix it, that particular mixture of guilt and calculation, where part of him was genuinely sorry and part of him was trying to figure out what sorry needed to look like. We talked for a long time. I listened more than I spoke, because I had already said the important things on the phone. He told me he'd been feeling pressure for the past 2 years that I didn't understand. That her family had expectations, that her father had opinions about what a man of his position should be, that there were standards for the life they were building that required a certain presentation. He said it as though he was explaining something I had never encountered, as though I were someone to whom the concept of external pressure was foreign. I let him finish. Then I said, Your mother and I built everything we had by being exactly who we were in every room we walked into. We didn't become smaller for anyone. We didn't apologize for what we'd built or how we'd built it. We introduced ourselves honestly and let people decide what they thought. Some of them decided we weren't worth their time. That was fine. The ones who didn't are still my friends today, 30 years later. I would rather have 3 honest people in my life than 20 people who only showed up because they liked the version of me you were presenting on my behalf. He was quiet for a long time. Is she worth it? I asked. The real her, not her family, not her father's money, not the Rosedale house. Her. Is she the person you want to build a life with? He thought about it. I respected that he actually thought about it rather than just saying yes. I don't know, he said eventually. Maybe. I think I've been confusing her with what comes with her. Then you should figure that out, I said, before you spend another year bending yourself into someone else's shape. I will not tell you that everything was resolved and forgiven in that kitchen conversation, because it wasn't. These things take time, and I am not a man who believes in quick reconciliations that don't mean anything. What I can tell you is that he called me the following week, and the week after that we went to a Leafs game in December, something we had not done together in years, and sat in decent but not extravagant seats, and ate bad hot dogs, and argued about the power play for 2 periods, and it was the most comfortable I had felt with my son in longer than I could accurately remember. He broke off the relationship in January. He did not tell me why in detail, and I did not ask. He said only that he had realized, once he looked at it clearly, that he had been trying to become a character in someone else's story, and that he was tired. I understood. I told him I was proud of him. I meant it. He does not know the full scope of what I changed. I have not told him, and I do not plan to, because it is not the point. The point was never to punish him, or to dangle money over his head like a lesson. The point was to do what was right with what I have, and what was right no longer included, arranging my legacy around someone who was willing to make me small. The charitable foundation is real. It will outlast both of us. My wife's name is on it. I think she would have liked that. I think she would have been pleased that her name ended up attached to something practical and enduring, a vocational training center in Northern Ontario, a bursary program for kids from rural communities who want to go into the trades, something that looks like the beginning of things rather than the end. I still drive the truck. I want to say something to whoever's listening to this, particularly if you are in your 60s and you have given a great deal of yourself to children who have not always recognized what that cost. I am not saying cut them off. I am not saying walk away. Relationships are more complicated than money, and money is more complicated than it looks. And I have never believed that wealth is a simple thing to give to someone who hasn't learned to carry it. What I am saying is this: you do not owe anyone a smaller version of yourself. Not your children, not their partners, not the parents of whoever your children are trying to impress. You built what you built by being fully who you are. You are allowed to stay that way. I was at the bottom of that staircase, the man lying on the hardwood floor while his son made a joke above him. That man deserved better. Not from the room full of strangers. From his own son, I gave myself better. That was the morning's work. When I see my son now, there is something different in how he looks at me. I have tried to name it, and the closest I can get is he sees me. The actual me, not the version he was managing. A man in his 60s who built something real from very little, who loved his wife completely, who drove a truck and kept his word and made hard calls when they needed to be made. That is who I am. That is who I have always been. It turns out that is more than enough. It turns out it always was.